So when will this be released?
Never.
Rude.
We're going to record this, and then we're just going to throw it into a black hole and never release it.
Well, it's going to be a can episode, right?
Yeah, this is going to be a can episode. I mean, I'll talk about this at the beginning of the episode, so that will answer your question.
I don't want to learn about it when our listeners learn about it. I want to know about it now.
Well, I'm going to talk about it right now.
I'm a voting member of this establishment. I'm shouting right now.
Yeah,
this is me shouting.
Okay, you just peeked the mic, so that's good.
Yes. That's never happened. I'm so excited.
View from the Gutters, bonus episode 4. Welcome to View from the Gutters, the comic book podcast where each episode we discuss a collected edition, trade paperback, or graphic novel, and then recommend and vote on the book for the next episode. Warning, the discussion portion of this show has massive spoilers for that book. On this episode, we discuss Daredevil Yellow by Jeph Loeb and Sale. Thank you to all of our Patreon sponsors for contributing to the show. Welcome to View from the Gutters, episode blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
I'm Tobiah Panshin.
I'm Kayleigh Fleeman.
Okay, I'm DeForge.
And I'm Cade Reynolds.
Because apparently fuck circles.
I gotta have that and. Like
Cade has
Willis.
called dibs on last person to be introduced for quite some time, and
All right.
And nobody stopped me, and then I was 50 episodes into doing it before somebody was like, hey, what's with that?
Anyway, this is a bit of a special episode of View from the Gutters in that we don't know when this is going to be released or under what circumstances. So a little bit ago, I think it was episode 147, we had a tie in our voting process, and we decided to resolve the tie by recording Daredevil Yellow, which is our topic for today, as a can episode. So this is going to go out at some point in the future whenever we can't record for some reason.
When one of us dies.
When the last vestiges of human civilization cling to the last bits of art media that are left after the great explosion, this will be when you hear this episode. This will be the nurturing voice that meets your ears.
I really hope one day people
darkness.
see this and they're like, oh, it's journalism.
Well, for all we know, when this reaches the voices or the ears of anyone beyond this room, it'll be thousands of years from now when we are all long dead.
God, I hope so.
What I'm going to say is that this is a premium episode, that the only way you could hear this is if you pay us money, which is funny because you couldn't hear me say that if that were the case.
Yeah.
Well,
All right.
people.
Well, don't
Unless
worry.
they already paid us money.
Yeah, don't
No,
worry.
that's not
You
enough.
have paid us money. We have snuck into your homes, and we've taken what we've needed.
I have snuck
Not
into yours.
always money.
Usually it's just
For the
pocket
record,
change,
the
pennies,
views expressed by
buttons.
Kayleigh Fleeman do not
Souls,
necessarily reflect the views
We
from
do
View
not
from the
collect our
prized
listeners' souls.
possessions.
I just go straight into the car because
Forgotten
I figure
memories.
there's a lot of quarters in there. You know, it's downtown Olympia. You need that quarter for parking. You know, it's untraceable, practically untraceable. I just leave them in different fucking meters all over the city. I don't fucking know.
Anyway, the point is, we're talking about Daredevil Yellow. And Cade, this was your pitch. So why don't you lead us in a little bit? Tell us, what is Daredevil Yellow about, and why did you want to talk about it?
So Daredevil Yellow is a look back at some of the early days of Matt Murdock's alter ego's beginnings. I mean, it's a book about his reflections on life, things that have happened, some of the major points of his career, and it's got a lot of neat references. I feel it's got a lot of neat cameos, like Purple Man at the end.
And this is part of the 4-color quadrology that Loeb and Sale have done together. along with Hulk Gray, Spider-Man Blue, and Captain America White. You're looking very intently like you have no idea what I'm talking about.
I've never heard of Captain America White, and I
That
thought
just
I picked
came
it.
out.
Oh, okay. I was going
The
to
rest
say
of these
I
all
bought
came out-
all of them when they came out, and I don't remember that one.
Yeah, the rest of them all came out in like 2003.
Mm-hmm.
Captain America White was supposed to come out, I believe, and didn't, and they just released it this year.
Okay, and that's by Loeb and Sale too?
Yes.
Wow, I need to read that then.
I think it is. I have to double check. But yeah, I mean, these are all reflections back on the early days when these characters were kind of first starting their careers.
Yeah, it's told from the perspective of now, but in flashbacks. Because, I mean, in it he does, reference Karen's death and stuff, which was pretty recent in the world of comics. Like within the last 20 years.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I guess it really depends on what your definition of recent is.
Recent as in since the time Daredevil has been around. That's a relatively new thing.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I guess spoilers for, what is it, Daredevil Born Again, regarding the death of Karen Page, if you haven't read that. It only came out like 20 or 30 years ago, so. But what is it that attracted you to this book? What prompted you to pitch it as a topic for conversation?
I mean, what really prompted me was the Daredevil show being so good. You know what it is. I feel like it hits upon many of the aspects of their relationships that you see in the show. I mean, it's obviously different because it's MCU versus old Marvel U. And I mean, this was never like actually canon anyways, but it was a more of a retrospective.
Although it does seem like they pinched some elements of this book for the Daredevil show.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Jeph Loeb is one of the executive producers. I mean, he's got his fingers in all of the TV show stuff.
Right, but there are specific moments in this book that show up in the show, them debating over whether it's going to be Murdock and Nelson or Nelson and Murdock.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And I think there was another moment that stood out specifically as one that showed up in the show. I think it was when he visits the mobster in jail, the one who killed his father, and he's like, why won't you give me the name of your boss's boss? And he's like, you don't understand. Like, I have kids. I have a family.
Yeah.
You don't talk about him.
You don't say Wilson Fisk's name.
Until the second half of the season, in which case everybody's like, Fisk, yeah, that Wilson Fisk. Fisky Fisk.
Hey.
Old Willie Fisk.
Shall not be named. And then they didn't.
There's nothing wrong with Fisk.
I mean... Wow. What was I about to say? Oh, yeah, you can definitely tell that when Drew Goddard went to Jeph Loeb and was like, I'm creating Daredevil. What should go in it? Jeph Loeb was like, well, I wrote this book about Daredevil and 10 years ago, and let's put some of that stuff in it. But I don't know. I really love that show, and I feel that this is a good thing to hand to somebody who, likes the show but has never read a Daredevil book. I mean, it's a book I've handed to a few people who have watched the Daredevil show, and they've been like, I've never watched anything with superheroes that was so good. And I'm just like, okay, well, now that you know who Daredevil is, you should read this.
All right. Well, let's open up the floor a little bit to a couple of people who both love Daredevil, the TV show, and maybe haven't read a whole lot of Daredevil comic books. Kayleigh, Kit, what did you think of this?
Oh, I know Kit's read a lot of Daredevil comics.
I have.
I have not read as many. But I really, unlike Spider-Man, Daredevil is one that I don't get sick of hearing his origin story. Like, I just really like it. I like all of the characters that are involved, like battling Jack, all that. Like, I'm all about it. Catholicism, boxers. We were talking about this the other day, Toby. I am 100% for boxing and for Catholicism. Like, those are my favorite things.
Box for Jesus.
Yeah, boxing for Saint Mary. Yeah, that's important.
Mhm.
But no, so like I really love this origin story, and I think Daredevil Yellow does a fantastic job of bringing in all those elements, which are so familiar to people who know the Daredevil story, but in a way that's interesting because it's a retrospect of like, oh yeah, this is a thing that happened when I was younger, and when I was young, and I had all this fire in my blood, it made me feel this way, and now I see where I was wrong.
Yeah, and they don't actually touch upon how he got his powers too. I kind of liked that.
Yeah, it's they don't really touch upon like how he got his powers, just more how he became Daredevil, I guess.
Yeah.
Because they never actually show him in this book of what he was like pre-powers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that there's a lot of commonalities, again, between this and the Daredevil TV show in terms of, in that show, he spends a very long time not being Daredevil. He's the devil of Hell's Kitchen. He's the man in black. He's this brooding, dark figure who doesn't quite know who he is or what he's supposed to be. And it's only at the very end of the series that he becomes Daredevil. And I think that this book shares that concept in that he's still trying to figure out what Daredevil is.
Mm-hmm.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. When it comes to superhero books for me, I feel that the ones that resonate with me the most are the ones that are more about the human being.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what aspects of like who you are as a person contribute to taking up what is a very extreme sort of act. Becoming a vigilante and all that. I think that there are times when the Loeb Sale combination works really well, and times that maybe it falls a little bit flat. I'm not as fond, say, of them doing the Superman that they did was not really my cup of tea. But I think that this is a case where their combination is pitch perfect, because a lot of the style of the art and the coloring and everything has this sort of feel of being a memory, I think. Mm-hmm. And I think that telling this story with those two people working together, especially in the context of this this therapeutic letter to Karen Page, I think is what makes this book what it is for me. When you go back and you explore how Matt decided to be Daredevil, all of his reasons for doing these things are, of course, very emotionally driven. A lot of superhero stories, that's commonly the case. But for some reason, it feels more imperative, I guess, when I read this book than when I read other origin stories. Like, again, Kayleigh, you talked about Spider-Man. You hear the Uncle Ben story so many times around that at some point it just doesn't matter to you.
Yeah.
Like, as awful as that sounds, at a certain point you're like, yep, he's dead. Yep, you blame yourself for it. Yep, that's too bad. But I feel like in Matt's case, in the case of Daredevil, what this story is telling is more of an active choice rather than a one-time decision, because of the quote in the beginning about his father saying that Murdocks keep getting back up. And starting out with the costume that was the mantle of his father before, it feels more emotionally resonant, I think, than a lot of these origin stories do.
Yeah, so there's a joke, and it's been floating around for a while, about the Spider-Man movie whenever it comes out, of, I swear to God, if it's another Spider-Man origin story, I'm shooting Uncle Ben myself. Right. And it's like, you just get so tired of it. Like, it's just not, it's interesting and it's really sad. And the first time that you see it, you go, oh, but Uncle Ben, oh, that's sad. And then after that, because Uncle Ben has never really been allowed to be a very full character, you're just like, okay, now I want the Spider-Man stuff. Whereas with Daredevil, Jack Murdock is a character, and he has such a huge influence over Matt's decisions that he is important as a character, and you feel like you've lost this character. So even though it's tragic, you kind of want to explore everything about him. There's a whole series dedicated to him called Battling Jack Murdock.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. I can't remember who does it off the top of my head. We have it at work. But absolutely fantastic. It simply follows his father.
And I think that works, though, like you're saying, because first off, you get a taste of who his father is. And by having that, you have the familial sort of resonance in his character as well, that you get to see the things, first off, that his dad instilled in him. And very actively in this book, the things that he points out that his father told him that he's choosing not to do. He may say something like, Dad says, you live your life in the ring. It's time for me to get into it. But he also says things like, my dad didn't want me to be an uneducated pug. He didn't want me to solve things with violence like he did. And so it's really interesting to see the push-pull of Matt, becoming a lawyer and trying to do what he can for justice on the civilian side. But of course, still kind of going against his dad's wishes by doing this Daredevil thing. But again, taking up his dad's costume to do this in what I'd say is a pretty Catholic gesture.
Yeah.
I think an apologetic sort of mindset of like, well, this is a penance thing, but it's not really,
Absolutely.
you feel compelled
to
do it.
It follows a lot into that iconography, whatever.
Iconography.
That one. Of Catholicism, of this idea of, this is a piece of a saint's robe, this is a bone from a saint, this is a church that was important. Like, you take these pieces and you incorporate it into things. And so very much so him taking his father's wrestling or boxing robe and bringing it into the costume and always keeping some form of element in there of that is incredibly important, both symbolically and religiously.
And that carries on through some other things, like, the idea of the walking cane or something as a weapon, where the whole idea is Matt is a character very much that, again, both figuratively and literally is Catholic because he does, like you said, carry on the past, carry on guilt, carry on personality into what he does in the present. He's very much informed by past action. And the whole crux of this book being carrying on a guilt that you have about a person and learning to forgive yourself rather than looking for someone to do the forgiving for you or assuage you of your guilt. That's my Maddie.
Yep.
It's my boy.
It's I don't think that there's really another character, at least not in the Marvel universe, that we see such a strong religious tie, except for Miss Marvel recently.
Yeah.
Other than that, I think Catholicism, especially in modern culture, is kind of like this thing that you do, right?
Maybe
you go
the Punisher.
Yeah, I haven't read a lot of the Punisher, so
he
maybe
is also very Catholic.
I was going to say,
although in a very different way, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll be in the next Daredevil season.
Yeah, so excited. But yeah, there's definitely this sort of anchor, I guess, based in Catholicism with Matt Murdock and family ties and community. So even though he is a vigilante, even though in times he is very brutal, like in the TV show, that's a very brutal show, you can see the love for his community, for his church, for his family. You can see it there. And that's kind of what leads to these actions.
Yeah, what's really been really great about Daredevil as a character over the years, I think this is something that Andrew Chard talked about a lot, that if you take that character or that person out of the story, would the exact same thing happen with somebody else, or would it be completely different? And you can't have Daredevil without Matt Murdock. Like, who he is so fundamental to what the character is about, how the story proceeds, that like you could not do Daredevil without Matt Murdock.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't work. The whole thing would fall apart.
Why he's never been replaced for any extended period of time. He's had people that will pose as him.
Yes.
But the idea is always like he's coming back, or we're hoping that he comes back, or where is he?
His identity got compromised.
Yeah.
Again.
Or he's too depressed to fight.
Yeah. Or too in prison.
Well, like I remember when DC did the death of Batman, And I remember having a pretty heated argument with a friend about how against this course of action I was, even though comics frequently are in the habit of, well, we don't have any good ideas, so let's kill somebody. And that's a thing they like to do. But the biggest part of my argument with this friend of mine was how much it bothered me to think that you could try to carry on Batman as anyone else. I maintain that position now. I feel like I haven't read any good Batman books where Batman is not Bruce Wayne. I don't really expect to, because honestly, my feeling about it is just, it's the same as Matt with me, is that so much of this person is intrinsically tied to this mantle and this character that I can't see it as a Batman book. Even if it's called Batman, even if they're wearing the Batman costume, I know that I'm not looking at Batman. It would kind of feel the same way with Matt. I just don't think that I could get into a Daredevil story without who Matt Murdock is as a person fueling that story.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to ask which Batman death are you referring to? Are you referring to the one where Azrael takes over? Or
Well, he didn't
Dick
die
Grayson?
in that story.
Well, yeah, but he didn't die in the other one.
I'm talking about when...
yeah, I guess that's true.
Well, when they were releasing the... and I love Neil Gaiman. When they were releasing the Neil Gaiman books about the funeral for Batman and everything that they had just a couple of years back, I remember really getting into it with a friend about this because I was like, I'm sorry, this is just... I won't be able to read a Batman book and care. They go, well, why? And I say, because it's not Batman. I'm interested in Batman. I'm interested in Bruce Wayne as a person. And for me, when it comes to like capes and tights and crap, I don't really care how powerful they are. I don't care, who their rogues gallery is nearly as much as why those people are doing what they're doing. And so if you just kind of deposit somebody else into this position, especially when the whole reason for doing this thing is dependent on the past of an individual, I've never really been able to jive with that. And that's a personal thing.
See, that's interesting, because I actually have a very opposite reaction to that particular story. And I guess minor spoilers for a comic from about 5 or 6 years ago. Batman gets hit by the Omega Sanction by Darkseid and is believed to be dead by the world at large. And there's kind of this big battle that happens over who's going to be the new Batman.
Which was called Battle for the Cowl.
Right, which shakes out with Dick Grayson taking up the mantle of Batman, which is something that he had never wanted to do. Like, Dick Grayson is, I think, more than any other of the Bat family, Bruce Wayne's son. And he didn't want to take up that legacy. What's that?
He was the first.
Yeah. He never wanted to take up the legacy. He didn't want to be Batman, but when Bruce Wayne disappeared and was presumed dead, he did it anyway.
Because there needs to be a Batman.
Right. But I think that the fundamental elements of Bruce Wayne that make him Batman, I think that that's a really interesting story. When you take him away and you go, how do you fill that void? Because you can't.
Yeah, it's because then Batman is ineffective as a character. You can still kind of use him as, like in the story, as a symbol, I suppose. But I think from what I'm talking about and thinking about is from the mindset of a character.
Oh, yeah.
Like whether or not I give a shit about the main character is kind of a big deal to me.
I just found it interesting how you have this entire cast of characters that kind of orbit Batman, and when you take Bruce Wayne out of that equation, what happens to everybody else?
Yeah.
Because no one person can replace him. So I thought it was a very interesting storytelling, but I definitely take your point that no one else can just step up and be Batman because Bruce Wayne is Batman.
Yeah.
Well, I think Kit hit the nail on the head in a much more articulated way than I ever did about why I did not like Superior Spider-Man. I was the only one on that episode who didn't like it. Yeah. But that's because to me, Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Like,
right. And my point as to why I liked Superior is the same. When you take Peter Parker out of the equation, everything changes.
And I guess that's really a question of whether you want to read a Spider-Man book or you want to read a book about Spider-Man, I guess, is like how do I phrase that properly to indicate that some people are picking up a book because they want to read about Batman. Some people are picking up a Batman book, as two completely distinct concepts. Again, back to Daredevil. For me, I don't really care about his rogues gallery that much. I find most of his villains admittedly pretty forgettable. So frankly, I don't care who he's punching half the time. I really don't. I care about how he deals with what he's doing and what kind of person he is, and his conflicts with his friends and himself and his family and, these other characters that come in and out of his life. I'm honestly more interested in the man than I am in the mask.
Yeah.
And that's honestly the same thing as Bruce Wayne for me. But back to being in this particular book that we are talking about. I think that's why this book stands out so much for me as a favorite Daredevil book, is because everything that happens in it is so critically tied to who he is as a person and what his past was. Things as simple, again, as the costume, as we've previously discussed, or these sort of lines that are written in the narration boxes that are like, even over the roar of the subway, I could tell, that the fixer was dead. Karen, you were the first one to call me the man without fear. I liked that and even reveled in it. I was, am, and always be so much like my dad. And it's pretty simple writing, not a whole lot of glitz, but it's very personal. And I get tied to very personal superhero books.
Yeah.
So
I think Daredevil books work the best when they are about Matt Murdock.
Yes.
Or at least keep Matt Murdock in focus. More so than Daredevil is facing this villain and what will happen next. It's like, I don't really care. Like, I want to know what Matt Murdock's going to do. And so I think Daredevil Yellow does such a fantastic job of framing these events in Daredevil's history. Karen Page's death, the face-off with Kilgrave, just all these different things that have happened, honestly, repeatedly, and were told many times by many different people. But it's being told from the singular point of view of Matt Murdock reflecting upon what he's done and telling it to somebody in a letter asking for forgiveness, or at least trying to find peace. And I think that really focuses the character and focuses a lot of what has happened around him and gives this a good core and a good solid base for this character and kind of recenters them.
That was very well said.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I will continue to push this book at other times for something that we discuss. But other than this particular Daredevil story, I really like Lee Weeks' Daredevil Dark Knights for the exact same reason, is because largely the narrative is centric around Matt's thoughts. And those are always my favorite books that are very dependent on what he's thinking and what he's feeling as a person and how he gets through these sort of conflicts, not just in a superhero kind of way or personal kind of way, but even further in the direction as being a person who's unable to see. They did that, I think, pretty darn well with the new Wade books. Mm-hmm. I found them as compelling as I did because almost every one of the stories I was reading wasn't about who he was punching. Again, it was about what conflicts he was having as a person and how he navigates the world in his individual circumstance. So. Yeah,
and I kind of wanted to talk about the Wade books a little bit. I think it's this right... Daredevil is one of those characters that you either write him in kind of a funny, lighthearted way or in a really awful, depressing way. And there is very little in between. Mark Waid definitely takes the lighter end of that. Yeah. But he does such a fantastic job of centering that character and making it about Maddie that it doesn't feel like a joke. Sometimes certain books, when they're written in a lighthearted way, and like Hawkeye, which admittedly I love the Hawkeye series, but there are times where it can be a little hard to read because it's just like, oh, this is just being played for laughs. Mark Waid's runs on Daredevil very rarely feel like that. They feel like a character who has really been through a lot, but there are still good things in his life, and he enjoys that.
Yeah, Wade writes the pre-Frank Miller Daredevil back when it was like how was Matt Murdock going to outthink this villain?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
kind of.
It's kind of weird because Daredevil started off his life very much as a Spider-Man clone.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and he was like,
and Miller is the one who came
jokey,
in and
happy.
he really gave him the depth, but also the moroseness. Went into this very dark place
Mm-hmm.
that most of the
people
other
have
writers
been-
who have followed him have continued.
Yeah, people have been writing him the Frank Miller way until Wade took over.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think Wade does a very good job of balancing the light and the dark.
I
Mhm.
could say the same, I think, for this book is that, again, while I like the Lee Weeks one a lot, it definitely hangs more on the sad kind of side of things. I had to pull it up here on Cade's iPad to think of specific instances where I think they allow the character to be a person with humor and like a fully rounded character.
Mm-hmm.
There is that scene when he's shooting pool and those jerks are kind of telling the jokes about Helen Keller.
Mm-hmm.
And as he's setting the rack and everything to shoot pool with them, and he hedges this sort of bet that he can get, everything where it needs to go. Even being a blind guy,
Mm-hmm.
he's sitting here and he's rattling off all these Helen Keller jokes
Yeah.
as a blind man, because they think they're so funny by telling these jokes about her and everything. And I love the personality
Yeah.
in this particular section because he's just, he's setting up the cue and everything going, oh, why does Helen Keller play the piano with one hand? She sings with the other. And then this great shot of just him just shooting that shit all over and these guys being made into total assholes.
Well, and my favorite part about that scene is at the very end where he turns to Foggy and says, "Do you know why I don't like Helen Keller jokes?" And Foggy, who's heard this joke apparently 100 times, goes, "Because you've read them all before in Braille."
That's right.
And it's like, that's wonderful. That's beautiful and perfect. And this is why I love Matt Murdock.
And it's fantastic again in the sense of creating a well-rounded character that you don't just use a person's disability. I don't like that word. That you don't just use that as a way for people to like play the sad little violin for them or as a way to tragic up their story. He's still allowed to be a human being with other personality traits and things in his life independent of his circumstance. And as indicated before, they don't really talk about how he became blind so much in this book. It's just accepted. It doesn't have to be so much a part of his story that it is like the big origin moment. Because if you write superhero stories well, I feel like you see all these other aspects of a person's life as defining moments that they may not even realize, but that tell you enough about who this person is, why they're fighting, and how they do it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need a really tragic sort of scene going on with little kids turning blind or pushing people out of the way of cars or people falling off of buildings. And that's what's great about this one, too, in regard to Karen Page, is that, like, I've taken to calling it page porn, is that when you get these things of, oh, the love, oh, the connection, oh, the tragedy, oh, the dead, I'm going to show the scene you've seen 90,000 times before. If you can still indicate that you've lost somebody and you can indicate that it matters without having to constantly exploit the manner in which they died.
Yeah.
To make it effective.
I wanted to bring up something. I don't know if anybody else has read this. Hawkeye versus Deadpool by Jerry Duggan. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were talking about the idea of not using disability to play the world's tiniest violin, but highlighting it as well, there is a scene in the first issue where Hawkeye has his Halloween costume on. And because it's like this stupid, like shitty little spaceman costume. And because of the way that he's made it, he has to take out his hearing aids so that he can put headphones on so it can look like a spaceman.
Mm-hmm.
And so he opens the door to greet trick-or-treaters and they start talking to him. And he's just like, I can't hear you. Like, and to me, that was so funny and like, oh yeah, 'cause he's got, he was just like, yeah, costume, this will be fine, sort of a thing. And I feel like that's one of the best ways to kind of like highlight it as like, this is a daily thing. Like, not every day that Hawkeye is deaf or Matt is blind are they going, oh, woe is me. Oh, this is so awful.
Soap poisoning.
So poisoning. So hard. Like, it becomes a part of daily life. And I think to show handicaps in that way normalizes them in a way that I don't think comics really have before. And a lot of popular culture have not. And so I think it's really important, actually, to have that sort of idea of there is blindness, there is deafness. This happens.
And it's a continuous thing.
Yeah, it's a continuous thing. It's not something that you're suddenly, oh my God, if only I could hear Beethoven again. Like, that's not really how it works. It's kind of it's a daily thing. And sometimes it's a struggle. Sometimes it's less of a struggle. It's not something that, as somebody with an ability, you can necessarily completely understand. But you can be sympathetic to, and media like this that kind of highlights those experiences helps that understanding.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I really haven't wanted to derail the conversation because I know you guys really like this story, but there were a couple of things less positive that I did want to talk about.
Like what?
Here it comes. Toby Cloud's rolling in.
Yeah. Well, one of them was the way that Foggy is depicted in this story. And I think that it really doesn't portray him in a very good light because it, at least from the way I read the story, he hires Karen specifically because he's infatuated with her, is constantly making advances at her, which she shrugs off. But he's very aggressive about it throughout this entire series, despite the fact that she shows absolutely zero interest in him whatsoever, is thinking about proposing to her.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it just really shows him in this very negative light that isn't particularly respectful or true towards the character.
Mm-hmm.
And it honestly kind of upset me that Foggy kind of feels like a sexual predator in this story. And that kind of upset me.
Yeah, actually, I think I agree with that in some ways. And I think that's a problem with how Foggy is, how he's written in a couple of different Daredevil stories. And it's kind of like the Sherlock and Watson syndrome, where Watson is written as a bumbling idiot.
Mm-hmm.
And Foggy is written by as a bumbling idiot. By bumbling idiots, haha.
Mm-hmm.
When they're not. Clearly, they're smart characters. They are, or should be moral characters because of the people that they follow. They should have like a solid core of personality and interests and likes, dislikes, all this. But they get molded kind of into this dumb blank slate,
right,
for whatever needs to be displayed at the time, or whatever needs to happen at the time, rather. And I do think that happens a little bit in this. I think it's story.
I think it's a callback to the early days of Daredevil because this really is that in so many ways, and that's kind of how Foggy was written back in those days. He was kind of a little bit of a bumbling fool. He was competing for Karen against Matt. Like, there was this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I kind of get why they did it in the way that they did, because they wanted to reference the way that Daredevil was in those early days. But I think that there's something to be said for leaving the less attractive elements of the past in the past. Like, this is how this character was written in like the 60s and 70s, and maybe we don't need that same portrayal today. Maybe we can recast things in a way that is more appropriate for today's sensibilities and morals.
My bigger problem is that there's a conflict here, that there's a big conflict in the showing and telling situation. For example, you've got the case where way toward the beginning of the book, you've got Matt in his dorm with Foggy, and the narration saying something to the effect of, "For the life of me, I can never understand why he got the nickname Foggy, such a brilliant man," and things like that. This idea that Matt, from his narrative and his perspective in many cases, is extolling the virtues of his friend, and the story itself is not really showing them.
Yeah.
And so I guess my problem is more how much of this storytelling perspective is really dependent on Matt, and if so, if you've come to that decision, how much of how you show that stuff is going to be reflective of what you tell us. So that's more my thing, I think, is that if this is supposed to be within the framework of a frame story of Matt telling these things or Matt writing these things, it seems very odd to me that you would choose that framework and then choose to portray Foggy in a way inconsistent with the framing of the story.
Mm-hmm.
That, to me, just that sort of strikes me as not paying enough attention, I think, to what your story is and how you tell it. That is a small complaint that I have about it. I can't help but notice again that a lot of Karen's clothes and everyone's clothes are supposed to be harkened back to a previous decade. I kind of wanted to shrug at one point and go, well, how much of Foggy being this way is, again, keeping with sensibilities of an older time, if it looks like the book is trying to tell you that this was set at a time in the past? How much of this stuff would have been normalized behavior and not necessarily something that we would look at then as like a really deplorable character trait, so much as a bumbling idiot who is kind of desperate to get one up on a situation where he doesn't really have as many cards as Matt does. And this is kind of a common storyline in a lot of these like so-called love triangle things, is somebody who feels less equipped than the other party rushing into a situation as if going first is going to fix the problem. It does not, in fact, make Foggy look any better, even with that potential theory in there. But I still don't... I'm still not sure how much of this problem is harmful to the greater story or harmful to the story in the sense of making his narration unreliable when we're supposed to be getting the story from Matt. Does that make any sense? Where I'm unsure whether I'm really getting the story from Matt if you're claiming that it's framed as his letters. Am I getting his memories, or am I getting the things as they were with his thoughts just kind of thrown in? And if so, why the letter, or why not go with his perspective? It's competing perspective, and that makes me wonder.
Yeah, I think that you made exactly the right comment, that there is this tension in the story between the story we're being told and the story that we're being shown.
Mm-hmm.
And that does kind of tie in with the other complaint that I have about this series, which is this is being told from Matt's perspective. It's about his early days, becoming Daredevil, but it's framed as him writing this letter to Karen, and about it being his early relationship with Karen, meeting her and falling in love with her, and about how he feels so guilty that she is now gone. And, this is a character that was, I think, very badly abused by by Frank Miller.
Yeah.
One of the most blatant cases of fridging that you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And for all that, Karen is not a strong presence in this series.
No.
And I kind of felt myself being a little upset about that she is, she is this object of this competition between Matt and Foggy, and that this is, someone that he is lusting after, but we don't get any of her thoughts or feelings. We kind of only secondhand get her reactions as Matt observes them. And I feel like it's a weakness of the story. And, that's kind of predicated on the way that it's framed. I don't know how else you would do it with the story set up in the way that it is, but it felt like a weakness to me.
That was going to be my next question, really, is like, considering the framing situation, how exactly would we suggest that this problem be alleviated? Like,
right.
That's a question I kept kind of asking myself, is how exactly would you fix this?
And I know,
like, if you're going by a letter.
I know in Spider-Man Blue, it's framed as him, I think, either writing a letter or reminiscing to Mary Jane about Gwen Stacy and her death.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like the framing device is something that's inherent in this series that Loeb and Sale were doing. And I feel like if it hadn't been framed in that way, they might have been able to tell the story better.
That's fair.
But the fact that it's dependent on these other books that were also coming out that were using the same format, I think it weakens this one at the very least.
Yeah, I can only potentially argue for the idealization of the object of someone's affection as a potential reason for not exploring that character more. Does it mean that we get a less rounded character? Absolutely. And if that was the case, I'm not really sure that's a necessary sacrifice.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that this is a bad story by any stretch of the imagination, just that this is something that I noticed that felt like a weakness to me.
It's a particular weakness of characterization, especially it's made especially more glaring by the strengths of the characterization in Matt, which I guess is half the problem. I still love the book very much and would recommend it to absolutely anyone interested in Daredevil.
Agreed, yeah.
But it is a real shame that you could build up so much of who this person is to somebody and have it ultimately treated like it doesn't matter by the writers who this person actually is, especially when so much of this is dependent on the feelings that you have about this person. It's a real shame, but darn her dress is cute.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of hopeful that insofar as the Daredevil TV show is an adaptation and a distillation of both this and The Man Without Fear, I really hope that they take the opportunity to really build Karen Page into a more well-rounded character that has a chance to have her own voice and her own stories told, specifically because of how much Frank Miller fucked her over.
Dude. Part of me just hopes that she survives, honestly. That she just keeps on ticking.
Yeah, I have to make a comment for whenever this is released to a person that I know I'm going to be linking this to. I remember when I told my coworker that this is something that he should watch and that he would like it because it's awesome. And he does whatever I tell him to do because I'm terrifying. But once I got my coworker watching this, I remember kind of this thing of like, man, I don't know, kind of feel like superhero chicks, they don't really get on so well. I kind of hope she's going to be okay. And I was like, so I'm kind of sitting here going, maybe I'll link this to you after second season of Daredevil. And if you ask me about it and I don't say anything, that will be why. So here's your answer. Yeah, Karen, I feel like you could be so much, and I'm so happy that the show at least seems to put more emphasis on who this person is, not just as the chick in the office, but as somebody who goes out drinking with her friends, or somebody who has to figure out how to kind of break down arguments between, again, friends at work or people just in their personal life, and has their own interests and goals and concerns as to why they're doing what they're doing. I would love the bonus of having that in this book. Again, I just have no idea where they'd put it. And that makes me sad.
That is very true.
So,
do we want to talk about the art?
Yes, we do.
I mean,
Let's go back to Karen's dresses, shall we?
Yeah.
They
Man.
are lovely.
Her dresses, though.
The shopping that I did after I borrowed this from work the first time, the dress shopping was greatly influenced. But there are times that this Styles monkey face makes me very sad.
Yeah, I experience constant frustration with Tim Sale's artwork because some of it is fucking ridiculously good. All of the tracking shots where you are seeing all of Daredevil's after images as he moves through like a 2-page splash and all the goons are around him and you see him ducking and weaving and jumping and the billy club is going around and he manages to compose this absolutely amazing shot. And then there's just a panel where some character is just wildly off model.
Bug-eyed monstrosity.
Yeah, bug-eyed monstrosity. And I can't quite reconcile those two things in my mind, whether I like Tim Sale or I hate him.
My whole thing is mundane situations in this book just sort of happen, I guess. And an odd side effect of this is I find myself paying stupid amounts of attention to backgrounds as a result. Kayleigh and I were talking about this in light of something completely different, Sleeping Beauty, last night.
Not completely different. Matt Murdock is my sleeping beauty.
He's a sleeping avocado. An avocado in the breeze.
Mi avocado.
Gosh. It's again, these covers, as you indicated, setting up a beautiful page like that are absolutely spectacular. I do find it a real shame that there aren't really posters of these floating around, because even for the funny chimp faces that he sometimes gets, I think they're beautiful. I think the muted colors are fantastic.
Yeah, I did want to mention Matt Hollingsworth is the color artist on this. He also did Hawkeye's colors, the Fraction and Aja.
Mm-hmm.
I think, he did Catwoman as well.
He's
one of my absolute favorite color artists.
Mm-hmm.
And he does a phenomenal job in this book. Throughout, the colors are just great.
I am very, very fond of the choice of having so many of these muted backgrounds in light of this, of course, as the title suggests, very yellow Daredevil, where even though he is obviously central to the page, you don't lose attention and you don't lose detail, where you know who you're supposed to follow across a panel or across a page just fine, but I don't feel like, as a result, it's the only thing I see. And I think that's a really unique and difficult thing to accomplish in comics, that people don't just look for where the action is for their story. This book kind of allows you to look at the setting as, again, setting as character is something that we talk about. These kind of dull, mundane sort of office looks, these gritty, sad city looks. The illuminated city at night with the shadows and everything else with this dark character running through. I don't think you have to sacrifice setting for a character-centric story either. I feel like it only reinforces this sense of him traveling not just as a person in his development, but also through time. The literal sense of living his life through all of this is something that I think you can feel through the color choices.
One thing I really do want to bring up about Sale's artwork and the coloring is how they draw other superheroes. Specifically, I guess, ones that you don't see often enough to notice whether or not they go off model. There is one with Ben, the Thing, where he is crouching in the window with the grumpiest face.
It's beautiful.
Like, okay, which one of you shysters is Nelson and which one is Murdock? And that is my favorite. I laughed for so long.
It's such
just
a good
looking
panel.
at this panel. And
a well done Ben Grimm is a beautiful thing.
Man.
And then you've got the don't call those lawyers shysters.
Yeah, it's just so beautiful. And so I love how he draws Reed Richards, like bending and all elasticy around things, and it looks really good. Unfortunately, one of the problems with Tim Sale's artwork is that sometimes he does do monkey faces, and I feel like Nelson and Murdock, who get the most page time, are also the ones that he does the worst.
It's pretty
to their
egregious.
faces.
Yeah.
But there is a panel somewhere where Foggy's face is pretty much just a blob of flesh with some squiggly lines in it and like this huge hook nose. And you're like, but he never drew him with a giant hook nose before, so why now? And why is that his only feature? Where did his eyes go? And my phone just went off. I don't know if everybody could hear that or not, but that's my phone.
That's $1 in the jar.
Oh, fuck off. It's my house.
That's the official Joe Preddy, your phone went off during a podcast jar.
Yeah.
I don't think he's ever paid anything to it.
No, he really hasn't. I need to get after him for that.
We could pay for a studio space.
Yeah,
and not
right.
use my house.
Hey.
Nah.
Anyway, you were saying.
But I do really love the artwork in this about 90% of the time, I think. The costume design is great. The action scenes are great, and I really feel like I can follow exactly what's going on, even without the tracking scenes.
Yeah, I really wish that Sale were more consistent, because he turns out certain pages, and I'm just holding up one from, I think, issue 3, when the owl first comes into the office, and it's Karen Page, and she's sitting at the desk, and then she turns and looks at him, and it's just beautifully done.
Yeah.
And it looks gorgeous. And then you turn the page, and it's a fucking monstrosity. Like,
yeah.
I wish there was more consistency there, because his art style is not that radically different from one of my absolute favorite artists, who's Phil Noto.
Yeah, I can kind of see that.
Yeah, like there's a little bit of a similarity there, and one of the reasons I love Noto is that his work is incredibly consistent, where from page to page, like, Sale's characters are kind of bending and morphing, and they look like they're made out of silly putty.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the good side of this, though, I'd have to say, in the plus side, art-wise, is if you have a strange fetish for human philtrums, you got it, son. You got it. You could put a fucking quarter underneath some of these noses, man, and they'd just fucking stay up. It'd be awesome. I think I'm harping on this because of the limitations that the art style has in terms of expression. Like, the actual anatomy of these faces means that a lot of the time I either get a mouth agape or like a crooked line for a frown or something. I feel like the length of the skulls in this style means that you can't really squash and stretch to make real expressions. That it kind of feels like there are these, like, one of the hallmarks of his styles, that you've got a block sitting on top of these shoulders. And so because of that, I feel that he overcompensates through action, or through bodily action, I think, to try to communicate some of these things. At times this works and results in some really charming panels. There's one, I wish I could find it right now. There is one of Karen and Matt, and they're kind of, I don't want to say prancing, but it's a really prancy sort of look.
Oh yeah, it's when Karen is she's got like her fists up, and she's like talking about how Daredevil was punching those guys out, and he kind of like puts an arm out as she lunges forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful scene, and it's really well composed, and it works.
And that's one of the more charming sides. Other times we just have sausage hands going burp,
yeah,
you know, and sort of wedging their way into these panels. I feel, though, that because of the tone or the tone of the book itself and the color choices and the more muted sort of way of doing things, it kind of harkens itself back again a little bit to older styles of comics, and I'm able to forgive more of the strange anatomical choices. And especially, too, these shadows. These shadows definitely, I feel, save a lot of the art. It's when I have these really brightly lit sort of panels that I struggle. I think, because you only have the two orbs of eyes floating in the middle of this like monochrome slab of color for a face.
Yeah.
Where it's hard to get any real sense of character in the face.
I kind of hate to say it because I know we've talked to Tim Sale and it's not a book that he particularly cares to talk about, but I think one of my favorite things I've seen that he's ever done is Billy 99, specifically because it is purely in black and white and he's able to use light and shadow to really great effect.
And did we talk about that one on the show?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
That was a very early episode. It might have been 19.
Hey, Kayleigh.
Yes, Kit.
I just thought that you might know, in case you didn't know about this book, that the design and lettering was done by one Mr. Richard
Yes.
Starkings.
Why,
Also,
yes,
speaking
it
of
was.
name dropping.
It was done by Comicraft, which was founded by Richard Starkings.
Yeah,
That
you actually see his
beautiful-
name a lot on lettering.
Perfect. Yes. A beautiful, perfect man
Mm-hmm.
who's perfect in every way.
It's good to
In
throw
fact,
some love in there.
Let's stop talking about Daredevil and just start talking about Richard Starkings because
How
I can
about
talk
never?
about him all day.
What, Richard Stark?
I mean,
Fuck
him
all.
too, but Richard Starkings,
Oh.
It'd
What do you
be-
mean we're not talking about noir?
nah.
Hey, oh, by the way, since it's required once per episode, noir done. Okay,
Noir.
noir.
Wah.
Um,
Wah, wah. But yeah, I think another part of my problem is just that looking at Tim Sale draw characters that I've seen other people draw is a little bit distracting because he has such a specific style. I feel like it's a little bit easier just to see original artwork where I've never seen anybody else draw this thing, so it looks right to me in a way that other things might not.
I feel the same way sometimes about Bruce Timm, where it can be distracting to see things that he draws that you're used to seeing a certain way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can definitely see that.
yeah.
I felt that. I don't know. I think Sale did a really good job on Long Halloween. I
Agreed.
think that's
Yes.
my favorite that he's done. But I think part of that is just because of the way he draws the Joker.
Mm-hmm.
It's
I
Well,
honestly
that's-
haven't read it in long enough that I don't actively recall.
just a very long chin.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah,
Really good.
the Joker's chin is like Batman's ears. The longer, the better.
Yeah, that's my favorite.
Chin for miles.
Mm-hmm. In the city of Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had a couple of things
Yes.
that I realized. So when Kayleigh was talking earlier about him using his dad's boxing robe, it occurred to me, how does nobody figure out his identity from that? Because wouldn't people remember Jack Murdock? Because
He's a good tailor, though.
Because in the TV show they actually mention it, like when the priest says Matthew and he looks at him weird, and it's like people around here still remember battling Jack Murdock.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why did nobody pick that up in the comic books?
I honestly don't recall whether the fact that his first outfit is made out of his dad's boxing robes is a thing that's original to this, or whether that was true in the original comics. But, I mean, it doesn't even look like a boxing gown.
No, it doesn't because of the way that he sewed it, but I don't know. Just like,
But, I mean, you could ask the exact same question about any of these characters. Like, if
no, that's
Karen
true.
can recognize his voice from another room, why doesn't she recognize his voice when he's dressed
and
up
he
like Daredevil?
that in there
Yeah,
in one of the bubbles.
and that's what we call lamp shading.
So another thing, I was trying to look it up, but it might just be in my head because I couldn't find it. I somehow remember that Foggy and her had a relationship, but he didn't want to share her heart with Daredevil because she was in love with Daredevil before she knew Matt was him. And
I
so
honestly don't
and so they
recall.
didn't.
Some stories have that as part of the storyline.
Oh,
I
okay.
recall picking up a few stories where she and Foggy are together at some point,
Okay.
either before or after relationships with Matt.
And see, and I was trying to remember if maybe that's why there was that whole like I'm gonna ask her to marry me thing in there. Like, Could
Sorry.
that have been a throwback to that?
I'm just remembering there was an early storyline in Daredevil where Karen and Foggy figure out that Matt is Daredevil. And so he tricks them by claiming that he's not Daredevil. His identical twin brother who can see is actually Daredevil.
Oh, that's me.
And so he pretends to be Daredevil and also his identical twin brother who dresses
Yes, Christ.
in the most ridiculous costume
Beautiful.
you could possibly imagine. And by ridiculous, I mean plaid green jacket and like zoot suit trousers
Awesome.
and like a boater hat.
Beautiful.
It's absolutely insane.
Or
Yeah. His twin brother, Mike.
Yes,
God.
Mike Murdock, who no one has ever heard of before.
But yeah, I was wondering if maybe the whole, like, I'm going to ask her to marry me thing was a throwback to that relationship in some of the comics. But I was trying to look it up and I couldn't find anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, potentially it's kind of hard to say, again, because it's really not clear whether this is really supposed to be things how they were, or if it's this kind of weird pastiche of the status quo of early Daredevil comics.
Yeah. I mean, this
it
was never
kind of
meant to
feels
be
like
canon.
the latter, that
it was meant to be like just a kind of a special edition thing.
Yeah.
I think I was just looking at this because I was trying to remember other Daredevil stories talking about Jack's robes and everything, and apparently there are a few, but some of them are depicted as yellow and black, I think, instead. But I was just curious about this because I went through a binge when I was first reading Yellow. I kind of had a Daredevil binge where I got online at 3:30 in the morning on my laptop and placed everything the library had on hold that was Daredevil, and everyone at work laughed at me because they had to adjust the cubby shelves because my holds pile was too large, and everyone complained.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so I was trying to think of which one I was reading that also talked about him using a rope, but I don't know. My memory is, I don't know, foggy.
Gross.
Accurate.
So did we have anything else that we wanted to talk about regarding Daredevil Yellow, or are we good to wrap up?
Not enough stilt man.
Well, there's no such thing.
D-, not enough stilt man.
Not enough D-Man either.
Not enough. Leapfrog.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for listening. No recommendations this week because we're not going to be picking an episode or a topic for our next episode. I don't know. Did anybody want to recommend another Daredevil story to check out? If you liked Daredevil Yellow?
I'll say it again, in case you didn't hear it the first 3 times. Lee Weeks, Daredevil, Dark Knights. Read the story. It's about Matt and how he gets his ass beat in a snowstorm, wakes up in a hospital, and has to slowly remember who he is through a mission that he goes on to find a downed helicopter containing an organ for a transplant that he overhears someone talking about in said same hospital. I love this story. It's called Angels Unaware. It's like a part of Daredevil Dark Knights in that trade. I couldn't recommend it more highly. It has everything that I like in a Daredevil story, which is Catholic guilt, Karen Page discussion that isn't just sad violin, but actually motivating in a good sort of way. And just the nobility and kindness and goodness of Matt Murdock, not just for the purpose of tragedy. I really like how strong his motivation is to do good things in this story and how much of that's informed by his desire to not make mistakes he's made before, rather than just feel all sulky about them. Read it. Lee Weeks needs more credit. I really liked that story.
Cool. Kayleigh, did you have anything that you wanted to recommend?
Well, one of my favorite Daredevil books is actually Guardian Devil by Kevin Smith and Joe Quesada. It's a very confusing book because some of the quote-unquote continuity doesn't make sense. But I don't know. It can be a good read, and I love Joe Quesada's art on it. course, it was coming out right about the same time he got promoted, so it was at times very sketchily done. I don't know.
Okay.
It's a book I like, but it's not for everybody.
It
Cool.
does definitely squash Black Widow into a box, but there are some really cool ideas there.
Good God, I was an Avenger.
There's some. I love Kevin Smith for a lot of things. I picked up that book with some excitement because I liked Kevin Smith so much. His writing is definitely funny and charming in that book. I do kind of feel bad for Black Widow. But hey, if you like any of the female characters in any Kevin Smith movie, you can rest assured that he wrote the same one for this book. So that's good. So great story though.
Nice.
For me, anything by Mark Waid. Any of the Daredevil stories I really love.
Awesome.
What about you?
I am
Yeah,
desperately
Toby.
trying to
Yeah,
look up
scramble,
the name
Toby.
of
Yay,
the,
scramble.
Dance for us.
the current team on Daredevil, because
Samney.
Samney. Chris Samney?
Sammy. No. I think it's Chris Samney.
Yeah.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Whomever. And I'll probably try and edit this in later. But the current Daredevil, which has had, I think, 2 or 3 issues at the time that we're recording this, I think is probably the strongest that Daredevil has been in years. As much as I love Wade's run, I really love the art style in this one.
So
I like
have they restarted it now?
Yeah, so post Secret Wars, Matt's identity is now a secret again. They have not
Super-duper
revealed
secret?
how. And he is a prosecuting attorney for the New York District Attorney's Office. And he has taken on a sidekick of sorts.
Okay.
And he is fighting a gang boss named Ten Fingers, who has 10 fingers on each hand.
That's too many.
Yeah, it's super gross. Oh, it's so ugh. But it really works for Daredevil. And much like this, it's very, very stylized. And he's got a new black costume that is really cool. And I've been super enjoying it, so I'm going to recommend that.
Does it have a boob window?
In my heart, it does.
Does it have
No
a
sale.
Does it have a crotch window?
No.
Shit. Darn it.
It's
There goes all my hopes and dreams.
my avocado. Why?
Yeah. It's
Show
the
us your
pits.
pit.
Now I'm just picturing Matt Murdock swinging around the rooftops of New York wearing chaps with just a floppy dick.
Bless you.
And that's a picture that nobody needed.
And that's
That's,
you listen to this whole thing to get to the sweetness at the end, at the bottom of the pie, guys. Come
Yeah.
on. It's good.
And so with floppy dick, we're going to leave you for this week. Thank you everybody for listening. We will be back next time with hopefully a brand new episode.
You won't be after the floppy dick, I'm sure.
That's why this episode will never see the light of day.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm just going to edit the word floppy dick in throughout the episode randomly and with no presage.
God.
Good.
All right. Good
All
night,
right.
everybody.
Good night.
This has been a production of View from the Gutters. We hope you'll join us next time for discussion of our selected title. In the meantime, we encourage you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Tumblr. Become a sponsor of the show at patreon.com/viewfromthegutters, or leave us a review on iTunes, as it does help new listeners find the show. We encourage you to send any questions, comments, or recommendations you may have to contact@viewfromthegutters.com. Thank you for listening, and as always, keep reading.
Floppy dick.
Floppy dick,
Floppy dick.